There are 7 charges that UK banks and financial institutions are applying to pensioner accounts right now in 2026 that are either explicitly illegal under FCA regulations, in direct violation of the Consumer Duty rules that came into force in 2023, or so clearly unfair that the Financial Ombudsman Service is overturning them on complaint in the majority of cases. 7 charges. And the reason most pensioners are still paying them is simple. The banks count on the fact that you will not complain. They count on the fact that a charge of £2 or £3 feels too small to fight. And they count on the fact that most people do not know their rights. I want to be clear about something before we go through each one. Some of these charges are straightforwardly illegal. Some are not technically illegal, but violate the FCA's Consumer Duty requirement that financial institutions act to deliver good outcomes for retail customers. Under Consumer Duty, a charge that causes foreseeable harm to a vulnerable customer, including pensioners on fixed incomes, and that is not clearly disclosed and consented to, is not compliant. And a non-compliant charge is one you have the right to refuse to pay and to have refunded. My name is James Whitfield. I have spent 16 years as an independent pension advisor, and the charge conversation is one I have been having more frequently since Consumer Duty came into force, because pensioners now have significantly stronger grounds than they previously had to push back against unfair banking charges. Charge number 1. Unarranged overdraft fees beyond the simple interest rate. Since April 2020, the Financial Conduct Authority's overdraft rules have been clear. Banks are permitted to charge one thing on overdrafts, both arranged and unarranged: a simple annual interest rate. No fixed daily fees, no monthly fees, no separate penalty charges for going into an unarranged overdraft. One rate, applied to the balance. That is it. If your bank has charged you a fixed daily fee for going into an unarranged overdraft at any point since April 2020, that charge was illegal. Full stop. The FCA's rules under the Consumer Credit Sourcebook are explicit. Fixed fees for unarranged overdraft borrowing are banned. Before April 2020, some banks were charging up to £5 per day for an unarranged overdraft. After April 2020, that was prohibited. But bank statements are complicated. Small charges appear with obscure descriptions. Many pensioners have been paying illegal overdraft fees since 2020 without knowing it. The action is to review your statements going back to April 2020. Look for any charge described as a daily overdraft fee, an unpaid transaction fee related to an unarranged overdraft, or a monthly overdraft usage charge that is not described as interest. If you find any such charge, write to your bank and request a full refund. If the bank refuses, escalate to the Financial Ombudsman Service. The Ombudsman is free to use, does not require a solicitor, and upholds a majority of complaints about unarranged overdraft charges charged after April 2020. That is charge number 1. Charge number 2. Excessive overdraft interest rates that were never clearly disclosed. Since April 2020, banks must display their overdraft interest rate as a simple annual interest rate, known as the EAR, Equivalent Annual Rate. This rate must be clearly advertised and comparable across institutions. The purpose of the rule was to end the practice of banks hiding the true cost of overdrafts behind complex fee structures. In 2026, most major UK banks charge between 35 and 40% EAR on overdrafts. That is a very high rate. It is legal. But here is where it becomes a consumer duty issue for pensioners. If you were moved onto an overdraft product with a high interest rate without being clearly told what that rate was, or if you have been in persistent overdraft for 12 or more consecutive months and your bank has not contacted you to offer help, your bank is in breach of its obligations. Under FCA rules, if you have been in overdraft for more than 12 months, your bank must contact you, explain the cost of persistent overdraft use, and offer practical alternatives to help you reduce or exit the overdraft. This requirement exists specifically because persistent low-level overdraft use is expensive and disproportionately affects people on fixed incomes. If your bank has not contacted you after 12 or more months in overdraft, write to them and ask why the persistent overdraft contact did not happen and what alternatives they can offer. This is not aggressive, it is asserting a right the FCA has given you. That is charge number 2. Charge number 3. Paper statement charges that were not clearly disclosed when the account was opened. A number of UK banks have introduced charges for paper statements in recent years. The charge is typically between £1 and £2 per month. For a pensioner with multiple accounts, this can be £3 to £6 per month or more, £36 to £72 per year, for receiving information about your own money that the bank is legally required to provide you. Here is the legal issue. Under the Payment Services Regulations 2017, your bank is required to provide you with regular account information. The regulations require this information to be provided electronically by default, but where a customer has specifically requested a different format, including paper, the bank must accommodate that request. The bank can charge for paper statements, but only if that charge was clearly disclosed to you before you agreed to it. If paper statement charges were added to your account after you opened it, without your explicit agreement to the new charge, the introduction of that charge is a material change to your account terms. Under the Payment Services Regulations, your bank must give you 2 months' notice of any change to your account terms that is not to your advantage. If they did not give you 2 months' notice, the charge was introduced unlawfully. Write to your bank. Ask when the paper statement charge was introduced to your account and what notice was provided. If adequate notice was not given, request a refund of all charges applied without proper notice. Under Consumer Duty, if the charge is causing you financial harm, particularly if you are on a fixed income and rely on paper statements to monitor your account, the bank has an obligation to consider whether applying the charge is consistent with good outcomes for you as a customer. That is charge number 3. Charge number 4. Branch access fees or reduced service penalties. The UK has lost thousands of bank branches in the past decade, according to which more than 5,000 UK bank branches have closed since 2015. For pensioners who are not comfortable with online or app-based banking, who have mobility limitations, or who live in areas where the nearest branch is now a significant journey, this has created a situation where accessing your own money costs time, travel expense, or practical difficulty. Some banks have introduced what are effectively penalties for using in-branch services rather than digital alternatives. Charges for processing certain transactions at a counter rather than a machine. Charges for services requested in person that are available online at no cost. Under the FCA's Consumer Duty rules, banks must consider the needs of vulnerable customers, and older customers who cannot or do not use digital banking qualify as potentially vulnerable under the FCA's guidance. A charge that is applied specifically to customers who need in-person service and that disproportionately affects older customers is one the FCA expects banks to justify under Consumer Duty. If you have been charged for using in-branch services, write to your bank's complaints department. Ask whether the charge is consistent with the bank's Consumer Duty obligations to vulnerable customers. Use those words specifically: Consumer Duty, vulnerable customers. Banks take complaints that reference Consumer Duty seriously because the FCA is actively reviewing how banks implement it. That is charge number 4. Charge number 5. Dormant account fees or inactivity charges that have not been properly disclosed. Some banks apply inactivity fees to accounts that have not had transactions for a specified period. In the UK, an account becomes legally dormant after a period of inactivity, typically 15 years, at which point unclaimed balances must be transferred to a reclaim fund. Short of that, banks apply their own inactivity policies. An inactivity fee on a savings account or a current account that is held for genuine savings purposes, that has not been transacted because the customer is intentionally preserving the balance, is one that many pensioners discover only when they check the account and find a smaller balance than expected. The key legal question is whether the inactivity fee was clearly disclosed when the account was opened and whether adequate notice was given before the fee began to apply. Under the Payment Services Regulations, changes to account terms require 2 months' notice. If the fee was introduced or increased without that notice, the charges are recoverable. Write to your bank, ask for the account terms at the time you opened the account and the date the inactivity fee was introduced or increased. Request a refund of any charges applied without proper notice. If the account has been dormant and you want to reactivate it without paying further fees, ask the bank what the minimum transaction is to reset the activity clock. That is charge number 5. Charge number 6. Charges for basic banking services that you are legally entitled to for free. The Payment Accounts Regulations 2016 require UK banks to offer a basic bank account to any customer who does not hold a payment account in the UK and who is legally resident in the EU. The basic bank account must allow you to receive payments, make payments, and withdraw cash. It must be available without a monthly fee. While the basic bank account is specifically designed for people who do not have a current account, the principle behind it is relevant to a broader consumer duty argument. Banks cannot charge customers for services that are fundamental to accessing their own money without clearly explaining and justifying those charges. If you are being charged a monthly fee for a current account that offers no services you use or value beyond basic payment and receipt of funds, ask your bank what basic account options are available. Most banks offer at least one genuinely fee-free current account. Some offer these specifically as pensioner accounts or basic accounts. The bank may not volunteer this information, but you are entitled to ask, and they are required to explain your options. That is charge number 6. Charge number 7. Charges applied following a bank error or technical failure. This is the one that generates the most complaints to the Financial Ombudsman Service and that banks most consistently try to avoid refunding. When a bank's system makes an error, when a payment fails due to a technical issue, when a direct debit is processed incorrectly, and the customer is charged a fee as a result of the bank's error, that fee is not the customer's liability. It is the bank's liability. Under the Consumer Rights Act 2015, services must be provided with reasonable care and skill. A bank that processes your account incorrectly and then charges you for the resulting error has not provided its service with reasonable care. The charge resulting from the error is recoverable. Under Regulation E's UK equivalent framework, the Payment Services Regulations 2017, your bank is required to refund an unauthorized payment transaction promptly and to restore your account to the state it would have been in if the transaction had not occurred. If you have been charged any fee that resulted from a bank error, a failed payment, an incorrect direct debit, or a technical failure, you are entitled to a full refund of that charge. Do not accept a bank's first response that the charge was applied in accordance with their terms. If the charge resulted from an error on the bank's side, it is recoverable regardless of their standard terms. Now let me explain how to use the Financial Ombudsman Service, because this is the tool that makes everything I have described enforceable. The Financial Ombudsman Service is a free, independent service that resolves disputes between consumers and financial businesses. You do not need a solicitor. You do not need to pay anything. You submit your complaint online at financial-ombudsman.org.uk or by calling 823 4000 567. The Ombudsman can order the bank to pay you a refund and can award compensation of up to £375,000 for financial loss. The process is as follows. First, make a formal written complaint to your bank. Give them 8 weeks to respond. If they reject your complaint or do not respond within 8 weeks, take the complaint to the Financial Ombudsman. The Ombudsman will review the case and issue a decision. If the decision is in your favour, the bank must comply. The Ombudsman upholds a significant proportion of complaints about bank charges, particularly where consumer duty obligations have not been met. A complaint that references consumer duty, that identifies a specific FCA rule that was breached, and that is supported by account statements showing the charges, is a strong complaint. For pensioners who have been paying any of the 7 charges I described today, the Financial Ombudsman is the mechanism that turns your legal rights into actual refunds. Review your statements. Identify any charge that fits one of the 7 categories. Write to your bank. If the bank refuses to refund, escalate to the Ombudsman. I will see you in the next one. Let me go deeper on several of these charges, because the practical details matter as much as knowing the rule. On charge number 1, the unarranged overdraft fees, I want to address the specific situation of pensioners who have been charged these fees repeatedly over several years without realizing they had grounds for a refund. The April 2020 FCA rule change was significant but poorly publicized. Many pensioners are unaware that fixed daily or monthly overdraft fees became illegal at that point. If you have been charged any such fee at any point from April 2020 onwards, you have up to 6 years to make a claim under the Limitation Act 1,980 for financial services complaints. That takes you back to 2020 for complaints made in 2026. The way to identify these charges on your statements is to look for any recurring charge that appeared when your account went into overdraft and that is described as anything other than interest. Descriptions like monthly overdraft fee, daily overdraft charge, unpaid transaction fee, or returned payment charge for items that bounced because of insufficient funds after April 2020 may all be illegal charges. Write to your bank's complaints team by post or by email, state the date range you are claiming for, list each charge you are disputing, and state clearly that you believe these charges violate the FCA's Consumer Credit Sourcebook rules on overdraft pricing as implemented in April 2020. Keep a copy of everything you send. On charge number 3, paper statement charges, I want to give you the exact language to use. Write to your bank and say the following. I am writing to formally dispute the paper statement charge that has been applied to my account. I request a full refund of all paper statement charges applied to my account since this charge was introduced, on the grounds that I was not provided with 2 months advance notice of this change to my account terms as required by the Payment Services Regulations 2017. I also note that under the FCA's Consumer Duty rules, your obligation to ensure good outcomes for retail customers requires you to consider whether this charge causes foreseeable harm to customers who rely on paper statements and who cannot easily access digital alternatives. That specific combination of the Payment Services Regulations and Consumer Duty is one that banks take seriously because it invokes 2 separate regulatory frameworks simultaneously. If your bank's initial response is a standard rejection, send the same letter to their formal complaints team, and if unresolved after 8 weeks, take it to the Financial Ombudsman. On charge number 4, branch access penalties, I want to address the broader issue of what Consumer Duty means for pensioners in practice. The Consumer Duty rules came into full force in July 2023 for existing products and services. They require firms to act to deliver good outcomes for retail customers in 4 areas. Products and services must be fit for purpose, price and value must be fair, consumer understanding must be supported, consumer support must be accessible. That 4th requirement, consumer support must be accessible, is directly relevant to pensioners who cannot easily access online services. If your bank's primary support channel is a website or app that you cannot easily use, and the alternatives available to you, telephone or branch, are either difficult to access or carry charges that the online option does not, the bank needs to justify that arrangement under Consumer Duty. Age UK and the Financial Inclusion Commission have both published guidance on how Consumer Duty applies specifically to older customers. Age UK offers free advice on banking complaints at ageuk.org.uk or by calling 855 6000 112. If you are unsure whether your complaint has merit, speaking with Age UK before writing to the bank costs nothing and gives you a clearer sense of how strong your position is. On charge number 7, errors and technical failures, I want to address a pattern that affects a significant number of pensioners who have state pension or benefits paid by direct debit. When a direct debit fails, either because the collecting organisation presented the payment on an incorrect date for an incorrect amount, or in circumstances where the bank should have queried the transaction, the bank may charge a returned payment fee or an unpaid direct debit fee. If the failure was caused by an error on the part of the collecting organisation rather than insufficient funds in your account, that charge is the collecting organisation's liability, not yours. Under the direct debit guarantee, which covers all direct debits set up under the BACK scheme, if a payment is taken in error, you are entitled to a full and immediate refund from your bank, no questions asked. If the bank applies a fee in connection with an erroneous direct debit, that fee is also recoverable under the direct debit guarantee. Call your bank immediately when any unexpected direct debit appears or any direct debit fails. Say the words direct debit guarantee. Ask for an immediate refund of the incorrect payment and any associated charges. The guarantee is backed by the banking industry, and your bank is obliged to comply immediately. Let me close with the broader picture of why 2026 is the right time to have this conversation. The FCA's Consumer Duty is relatively new. It came into full force in 2023. and the FCA is actively reviewing how firms are implementing it. Banks are aware that the regulator is watching. Complaints that reference consumer duty are being treated with more seriousness than they were 3 years ago, precisely because banks know the FCA is looking at whether their complaints handling meets the new standard. At the same time, the cost of living pressure on pensioners has increased significantly. The combination of higher energy costs, frozen tax thresholds, and rising everyday expenses means that fees that might have felt trivial in a different economic environment are now genuinely significant for people on fixed incomes. You do not need to accept charges that are illegal. You do not need to accept charges that breach consumer duty. You do not need to pay for banking services that cause you harm without being given a genuine choice about whether to accept them. Your rights are established in law. The Financial Ombudsman is free to use and effective, and the banks, faced with a clear and well-articulated complaint that references the correct regulatory framework, will in many cases simply refund the charge rather than fight a complaint they know they cannot win. Pass this video on to one person in your life who banks with a high street institution and has not checked their statements carefully in the past 6 months. There is a very good chance they will find at least one of the 7 charges I described hiding in their account. I will see you in the next one.